Welcome back. If we are saying Black Lives Matters, then that means baby Pendo's life, the 6-month-old baby's life matters. That means we're also talking about Yasin, the 13-year-old boy who was shot. That means his life also matters right here in Nairobi, Kenya. Police brutality is still a very much real thing. Here's the case. At least 6 people so far have lost their lives to police violence during the first 10 days of the curfew that we saw, the dusk to dawn curfew. Yep, those first 10 days, 6 people lost their lives at the hands of police violence. And here's the thing, we've been seeing peaceful demonstrations in Nairobi in regards to the increased numbers of violence and killings during this coronavirus curfew. IPOA itself has already said that they have received, get this, not 1, not 2, not 20, not 50, not 60, 87 complaints against police since the curfew. Joining us right now via way of Skype is Nerima Wako. She is Executive Director at Siasa Place. Nerima, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for creating time. Allow me to dive straight into this and ask, Nerima, what ails our police service? Because this is not the first time we're having this discussion.
No, it's not. It's also so frightful to hear what you are talking about, because when you talk about a baby and a teenager who are both at home when that happened, and home is supposed to be one of the safest places. And when we talk about our police service or our police officers, they're supposed to be that emblem of protection. But police brutality and young people have had a terrible history. As a matter of fact, young people do fear the police, and they were fearing the police now even more than the coronavirus. So we're talking about people wearing masks only when they see police, people avoiding the police because they're afraid that they might be called upon because of something that they've done wrong. And a lot of times they're just walking. And in Nairobi, it's one of the only cities where young people are actually arrested for loitering. So I would say that those numbers of cases are high. As a matter of fact, according to records, they're even up to 10,000 cases. But when we talk about those individuals who've been arrested, most recently, Yasin Moyo, the individual was arrested. But those convictions are very rare to come by. So what's the point of reporting for a lot of people? So it's concerning.
And here's the thing, then how long, Nerima, will it take for us to sort of patch up, fix up this relationship that we have, that the public has with police? How long will it take for us to see a time when you get lost in Nairobi, in Kenya, you see a police officer and you see safety and not the other way around?
It's going to take a long time, because there's also the narrative that we have to change. The fact that police officers are there to protect and serve the people, that will have to change. And that means relationships with community members, because even when you look at the cases that you've mentioned, a lot of times they happen in urban areas, in slum areas. You don't hear those cases in areas like, say, Lavington or Karen. So what does that mean? And also when we're talking about the fact that there was a case also in Mathare where an elderly man also died, and people had to take his body not to that particular police station that was near Mathare. They walked all the way to Muthaiga police station because they believed that there, 1, they'll be heard, and 2, that's where the police officer was based, not necessarily the police office that was near Mathare. So even when we talk about how we're going to be able to mend those relationships, changing the narrative, also the police officers themselves, their job is not easy. It's extremely difficult.
Right.
But they do live in housing that's dilapidated. They don't have the kind of salary that they can live off on, raising a family. So they're also frustrated themselves. And it's not to say that they now put that frustration on citizens.
Right.
So
and Nerima, to what
Hmm?
extent should we as a public be cautious enough to make sure we don't do that? We don't put one killer cop in the same basket with all good cops, because they're also good cops at the end of the day.
They are good cops. I've even seen cops who have been distributing masks. They've been distributing sanitizers. Some of them have been helping citizens carry their luggage, trying to beat the curfew. I think that we need to highlight more of those individuals, receive awards or give awards to those individuals, highlight those individuals. A lot of times the bad stories are the ones that are seen the most. But unfortunately, they're very many bad seeds due to how difficult the economic turn is. Because how many people have you heard of, including friends, who they were just about to miss the curfew and they just gave a few shillings to avoid being arrested or being taken to quarantine? Or we've heard of stories of police officers threatening to take you to quarantine if you do not bribe them. Or how many people left counties to travel to Nairobi when they were not supposed to be able to travel, just paying at the different barriers. So
and honestly, Nerima, you're walking me through my questions, because that's the next thing I was going to ask you. You're reading my mind. I want us to now put a mirror on ourselves as society and ask, how much of this have we contributed? This bittersweet relationship that the public has with the police, Nerima, how much of that have we contributed? Because it is still us who bribe the same police officers to get a shortcut today.
Yes, I wrote about it also in a column of mine where I said that in Kenya, we actually do it to beat the system because we find our system so slow, our judiciary system so slow. So even if you're pulled over for driving and say you're supposed to go to court because of a fine, people would rather bribe the police officer to avoid that whole delay of going to court. Because the good people who go to court are the ones who end up in more trouble and time delays, you're wasting more money. And so it's a frustration. So I think, one, our systems need to be expedited. Even in cases like Rwanda, where if you're pulled over by a police officer, you pay a fine immediately. They do the same thing in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. So we need to find systems that are probably digital and electronic to cut down on some of these issues, and I believe that Kenyans would be willing to support. But also Mutahi Gunyi has written about it often, where there's so much corruption and bribery within the judiciary system, and he argues that why not just make it open, where you decide how much you can afford to bribe, and everybody is aware of it so that at least it moves within the system. But it's unfortunate that we're even having those discussions because we can see that it's a lack of process and systems. And if we fix our systems and follow those systems, because in Kenya we have some who are above the law, then it will be better to implement and easier to implement.
Let's bring in Rene Ngamau. Rene Ngamau is a lawyer and, of course, the Amnesty International Kenya Chair. Rene is also joining us via way of Skype. Rene, thank you so much for making time this morning. Let me just pick up your mind and rope you in from the aspect of from where you sit as Amnesty International. What is ailing our police service? It's the same thing I had asked Nerima at the beginning of this, because, Rene, this is not the first time we're having this discussion. What is ailing our police service?
I think that's a very complex question, but I would pick a number of things. The first is turning a force into a service. The ethos of the police service as it is today has always come from a backdrop of a police force. And to change a culture of an organization, especially an organization that is very command and control, without the resources, not just financial, but also psychological, and a real focus on changing a service from being a force. We can see the struggle with that. We can see it in the images. This is how many years after the police force declared itself a service. And we're still seeing the very aspects of behavior that suggest force as opposed to service. Number two, I think there is not enough will by every echelon of the police service and those in support in and outside of government to actually stop, full stop, the use of violence as a way to control and to police. I think it's very useful that we saw, following the meeting on the 5th of June, earlier this month, we saw the statement by the Office of the President, Ministry of the Interior, CS Matiang'i, saying that police officers who violate citizens' rights will take individual responsibility and ultimately be subjected to the law. I think this may have passed very many people, but you've got to understand how powerful a statement that is, given that prior to this, we have seen equivocal and not always very focused attention on bringing police officers to book after an incident has occurred. And we've seen the quick turnaround now. Look at how quickly it's taken for, the killers of Yasin Moyo to be brought to court. Look at earlier police brutality cases, particularly over the last 2 months, and the speed at which there's been a turnaround for investigation, indictment, and a bringing to the courts. So we're beginning to see that change, but it's not quick enough, sadly, especially for those who are already victims.
That change is not quick enough. And here's the thing, Rene, at the end of the day, this conversation that we're having is coming timely. Yesterday, 2020, the theme for this year's International Day of the African Child was access to a child-friendly justice system in Africa. Rene and Nerima, but let me start with Rene rather. Indeed, Rene, where's the justice for baby Pendo? For 13-year-old Yasmin, where is justice at the end of the day for this African child?
I think justice is very dependent on how you will gauge justice. I don't think that for the parents of baby Pendo, there is anything that we could ever do that could bring back that child. For Yasin Moyo's family that watched him get cut down on that balcony that evening, there is nothing that could possibly be done that could ever bring that boy back. However, justice must be that those who are responsible, not just the man who pulled the trigger and shot the bullet, but also the entire chain of command that brings us to a situation where a 13-year-old boy would be shot on the balcony of his third-floor apartment, are brought to book. In the case of baby Pendo, similarly, I doubt that there's ever anything that you could tell to a parent that would say, that would replace their loss. But justice is that not only the officers who were involved in that murder, but also the entire chain of command, as we saw in one of the very earliest cases that was investigated and tried by Aipoa Kwekwe, the little girl in Kwale, where it was not just the officers who were involved in that raid and then the killing, but also the officers who were at the commanding officers and the investigating officers who had tried to cover up that murder. And we need to see a lot more of that for justice for not just the African child, but Africans. We put aside children's rights as though they are separate from human rights. They're not. Children are humans. Women are humans. It is the same right. And as long as we don't understand that if we've got a population that is over 50% under 18, when we talk about children's rights, we're talking about the rights of half of our population.
Wow, okay.
When we talk about women's rights, we're talking about the rights of half of our population.
Right, right.
So this is not like a separate special rights corner over there for a special minority. This is for a majority of Kenyans and indeed of Africans. And we've got to start thinking about justice and human rights, safety, security, and protection, policing, in terms of, are we policing correctly for that 50+%?
My goodness, Nerima, come in. Nerima, come in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Rene has painted a very detailed image there that it's not just rights for children and rights for women, but rights for the majority of the population. But from where you stand, Nerima, where is justice? If here we are speaking about justice for the African child, where is justice for the children that are closer here? Because at the end of the day, if it's justice systems, it's still the same justice system that we sort of put a cupcake discussion over it, a glossy discussion over it, and we say tomorrow a child from Turkana can become president. If really we do have a justice system that is for children, where is it right now, Nerima?
I think also it's also a discussion on equality and value for life, because again, I believe I had spokesperson Charles Owino speaking about how police officers started using guns in the 70s, and they used to use batons previously. And the only reason that they were using guns is because now armed robberies began to use guns. And justifying it in a sense that they need to protect themselves. But these cases are not on defense. And the fact that even when we think about a police officer walking around with a weapon, but not feeling a sense of responsibility that one bullet can actually take away one life. And we're talking about children's lives, and we're talking about majorities' lives, then it's concerning that they don't see the kind of power and responsibility that they hold within those hands. And I think when we talk about justice and we talk about equality, we can't say that these children are equal to some children in other locations. I think if we ignore the fact that there's also classism when it comes to access to justice, there's that sense of corruption when it comes to access to justice,
Right.
then we are not solving any problem. If someone in Turkana can report a police officer, it should be the same for somebody who is in Nairobi in a very flashy, posh residential area. It should be equal access to justice. And that's why I feel that we're lacking, including in Africa, not just Kenya.
Wow, wow. Let there be equal justice for that child who is in Lavington and that child who is in Isili. I hear you. Rene, at the end of the day, you've talked about how it's not just enough to fire or let go that police officer who sort of released the bullet. It's sort of that chain of command. Here's the thing, killer police officers in police in the past few weeks or months, should I say, even for them in their own community, in their own society, they've been facing police brutality. For them, we've been seeing killer cops in America lose their jobs and laws passed to make sure that this doesn't happen. Here in Kenya, what do you want to see being done? I mean, you have definitely taken us through that aspect, Rene, of where it's not just enough to convict the person who released the bullet, but that chain of command. Rene, what do you want to see being done?
I think we've already started to see it being, if not done, certainly being discussed and actually being rolled out and implemented. Number one is that the police officers who were immediately involved with an incident, that incident needs to be investigated. We need a list of everything that has happened, not just the officers who have been taken to court, but how many officers have been indicted? Who are they? Let's name them. If we know who the victims are, let's name the officers as well. What exactly were they transferred? What happened to them? And if they were transferred, what is the basis of it? Because we see very often that officers who are a nuisance in one station or who have received a lot of reports in one station are moved to another station. That is very rarely a proper response. All you do is that you spread the problem. So we want to see the indictments. We also want to see answerability further up along the ranks. When your OCS knows that he is answerable for the actions and the activities of his police officers on the beat, he will be or she will be a lot more clear in the briefing of what the expectation is, and they will bring discipline, because the police service is a command and control, right the way back to vigilance. We also want to see a lot more of the compensation. And the compensation at some point, especially in cases of repeat offense and extreme brutality, needs to be personal. The moment when an officer drags a woman across a street on a motorcycle and has not only to face criminal charges, but also civil charges for compensation, then there's going to be a response that will be very different. But also the other side of this is this, that we've got to remember that we highlight a lot of police brutality, but we do not celebrate and we do not see the police themselves celebrate a lot more of the things that the police are doing well, which tends to have a skewed narrative. If you remember, you've shown a number of times right now as we were speaking, a caption of the police beating the driver who was asked to come down from the truck as he was delivering goods at night. The police officers in Mombasa, I think it was by the ferry, who asked people to sit down and they were being beaten. We haven't seen a single clip of the policewoman who was helping a woman and who had a little child and a huge bag, and they were walking home right after curfew. Do you remember that image? Why do we not see more of these images as well? Why am I asking for these images? Not because I am defending the police, but because it creates a balanced narrative. Who is this officer? And what has happened to her? Has she been promoted? Where is she now? How can we get more of them? And how can we celebrate them? So the police see themselves as being celebrated, not just vilified. The third one is something that Nerima has brought up, which I thought I don't want it to slide, because it's so important. Nerima, you spoke about, sorry, Nerima, not Nerima. Nerima, you spoke about guns and putting guns in police officers' hands. Have you ever looked at the size of the gun and actually thought practically, what does this work? for an officer on the beat. If this officer needs to stop and help someone, they literally need to put this gun down because of its size. Why do we not have guns that can be sat at the hip? Why do we not have alongside that first aid kits? Because many times police officers will be involved in situations where they need to be the first responders in a situation of an accident or an incident that involves an immediate health crisis that requires first aid. How practical is it for us to have, you know, G3 rifles or whatever it is that they're carrying and not have their hands free? That alone as an act, a physical act, enables them to actually be of service more than to be in the space where constantly the one tool that they have at their disposal and that is the largest is a gun.
Right, and you know, Rene, as you're speaking, Nerima is here nodding. Nerima, just come in. When she was talking about the guns, you were echoing quite there in agreement. But here's the thing, Nerima, even as our time unfortunately is coming to an end, I would love for you to put the last nail on this coffin by asking, Rene has definitely taken us through what we want to see being done. But what role can we as society play? We've definitely been seeing peaceful demonstrations on the ground. As you're also sort of putting in your comment in regards to what Rene is saying, could you also just tell us what role do we as society have to play in making sure what Rene is saying, knowing the names of these killer cops, because it does become personal, and also knowing the names of the good cops and seeing them being promoted as well?
I was nodding when Rene was speaking, because even that image of the guns, it made me think, those are the guns that are used at war. And I had this whole aspect of intimidation, fear, and that's what young people see constantly when they see the police force. And I think when we talked about even the peaceful protests, and right now there's the whole Black Lives Matter, and the US, it's about profiling of Black Americans. But here we have profiling of young people, and it's a reality for many young people every single day. And I think going forward, there needs to be a collaborative approach where the police community and communities themselves come together and work together. I think that's something that we have to see more young people not being afraid of police, and police not being skeptical of young people. I think that needs to be mended. And that's going to take a lot of years and work and efforts from multifaceted stakeholders, but I believe that it's extremely important for us to do.
Wow, wow. Ladies, I'm afraid our time is up, but allow me to sort of pause it there. Great points have definitely come from Rene and Nerima. They're just helping us understand police brutality. Rene Ngamau, a lawyer, and of course the chair of Amnesty International here in Kenya, she has really given out profound things such as this. If we're supposed to see a change, it will all begin with a change of psychological attitude and also finances, a change of culture. She's also talked about how it's also important, as much as we know the names of the victims, it's also important to know the names of the officers. Know the names, it becomes personal, and of course that chain of command. Nerima has also definitely helped us understand how that there are also good cops. There's not just every killer cop. There are definitely good cops, in the classism injustice that we are seeing here in Kenya. If the right of a child living in Lavington should be the same right of a child living in Isili, should be the same right of a child living in Turkana. Ladies, thank you so much. I'm sure time would have allowed us to even dive a bit further, but this is indeed a discussion that can never come to an end. Police brutality